the thing that makes slimy sales slimy is that they don't have permission to sell. If they just like, well, use the car salesman, right? Like they just launch into all of these things and you're just like, whoa, hello. I just wanted to look at this car and open the door and smell the fresh leather. Like, I don't need your life story. Don't need you to tell me about 47 cars. So that's what makes sales slimy. Let's talk about like a networking situation, or you meet somebody and they say, what do you do? Your gut reaction, especially if you have no connection to this person, is to basically word vomit on them every product or service that you have, because you don't know what's going to land with them. And that's slimy, right? You don't have permission to give them all of that information. So what you want in your one-liner is for them to just give them a little bit to show that, you know what you're talking about. Here's the thing. And you want them that to pique their interest to where they lean in and they give you permission by saying something like, how do you do that? Or tell me more about that. And then you have the permission to continue on. So that's the biggest distinction.
Welcome back to the 7-Figure Leap podcast. I am joined by a very special guest today, one of my best business buddies, Danielle Bornowski. So Danielle and I have known each other for quite a while. She is an alumni of our podcast Profits Accelerator. She's a member of our mastermind. She recently did a really awesome guest training for the 7-Figure Leap community, all about this idea of one-liners. So we're definitely going to get into that. We actually originally met through the StoryBrand community. So there's a lot of concentric circles that overlap between Danielle and I. But Danielle, I'm just like super grateful to have you here. I want to just kind of turn the mic over to you, and you don't have to use a one-liner, you can, but I just want you to introduce yourself, kind of start talking a little bit about your backstory, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to be here with you today, Dustin. There's definitely a pressure if I'm going to talk about one-liners. I feel like people are super dialed into the next words that I say. So my entrepreneurial journey, much like many people, didn't start out as an entrepreneurial journey. I thought I was going to be in the nonprofit space my entire life. My dad was a minister. He served in nonprofits, and that was just the path that I followed or thought I was going to follow. So I did that for the first maybe 10 years of my career after college. Was the communications director at a nonprofit. And I remember sitting with my husband one afternoon at work going, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if I just didn't have to report to anybody? My organization was undergoing a strategic plan, and I was not the person to execute on that vision. And I think both sides, like I think my boss and I both felt that, but it was kind of, it's like, what do you do? What's next, right? And so I just remember sitting there having that conversation with him. And a few months later, that was it, right? We just sitting around talking about it on the back porch. A few months later, we're sitting in church, and I look over at my husband and I was like, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. And he's like, okay. And so I did. The next day, Monday morning, I put in my notice and had no idea really what that looked like. So I was like, I'll just, I don't know, it was kind of summer time frame. I'll just freelance for a little bit and see what happens. And if worse comes to worse, I'll Instacart a little. That was when Instacart was really, taking off.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, it was just a very interesting, I had no idea. So a friend of mine invited me to coffee networking event. And so I'm talking to people, and, I'm, for anybody that's can see us right now, I'm very obviously, I'm millennial, and look like I hang out on Instagram and Pinterest a fair amount of the time. And so at this networking coffee chats that were happening every week, people just kept asking me about social media. And so that was kind of how the business started, was that people were asking for help with social media. And of course, I'm desperate to make money, right? I left a stable paycheck to do potentially Instacart. And my first...
I'm not sure yet. It's Insta something. It could be Insta Coffee, Instacart, maybe Instagram if things work out really well. But yeah, no, I love that.
Need some Insta money, right? My first invoice and first month of being self-employed, I made $77. So I was, here we are. And so that was the business that I started to build, was a social media management agency. I brought on contractors and had account managers for these clients who would come to me and be like, my granddaughter told me I need Instagram and I don't know how to do it. And so what I found though was that when we started talking, I'd be like, yeah, okay, cool. I can help you with Instagram. But I'd ask them, what are you trying to do? What are your goals? And they're like, grow my business. And I'm like, right, but what are we doing here? Right? Like, do we have a lead generator? Oh, Instagram crashed yesterday. You can't contact people. Do you have an email list? What are you trying? What are we doing? There was no strategy, Dustin, like nothing. Somebody said, you need an Instagram or TikTok. And so I started coaching to strategy. And that just became part of what I was doing, and I wasn't charging for it. Okay. So they were paying for a Honda and I was delivering a Porsche, and I would talk about charging them for like a Mazda, and they would like push back, right? Because strategy is hard. Strategy is a hard concept. And I'm like, I learned all these things. You should pay me more money now. It's real awkward. And so it was stressing me out. I don't love social media. Like, let me just be clear. I look like a millennial. Well, I mean, I am a millennial, but I don't love social. I do not like to spend my time there. And so my husband, always the, super supportive guy that he is, one day he's like, hey, babe, you're kind of grumpy about this stuff all the time. I love you so much, and you're kind of grumpy. And he was like, aren't you in charge of this business? Like, you get to decide. You get to make the decision. If you don't like social and this is bothering you, then don't do it. And I was like, what? Okay, yeah, yes, thank you. I don't know what that looks like. So some coaching and some kind of, exploration helped me to figure out that strategy side of things. That was the lane that I like to be in, right? So sure, somebody said you need to be on Instagram, but are you going to show up and be on Instagram the way you are in person and in real life? Because if you're not, it's not worth it. Just, you might as well don't even start. And so then we took that kind of transition the business out of the social media management and into the strategy side of building a marketing plan that actually fits with my clients. So your bandwidth, your budget, your personality, your goals, all of those things are factors. You can't just take one juicy nugget that you heard from a podcast and be like, oh, this is it. I'm changing course on my business. And that's going to change everything.
That's awesome. So preacher's daughter, hey, nonprofits are the jam. You did that for 10 years. And then I don't know. I mean, I'm curious about this moment in church when you leaned over to your husband. Was there like a true epiphany, or was it just sort of like you had a little bit of free time to think and you're like, I feel like God's saying, screw it, let's try something new. Did it feel like a call to something new? Or because it's kind of interesting. You'd think people are sitting in church and they get called to the nonprofit, not from the nonprofit to an entrepreneurship situation. Although personally, with my values, I feel like entrepreneurship is a super high calling and a great way to serve people and a great personal development tool. So I'm not judging it. I'm just wondering a little more about that change, because that's a really substantial change in kind of your life plan.
Yeah. I wish that I remembered the exact scripture that our pastor was preaching on that day, and I don't. What I do remember is I think he was preaching from the gospel, and it just was I had this feeling in this moment of, this is not where God wants me to be. Now, I am not making an impact here. I'm just butting heads, and I'm frustrated, and I'm being micromanaged, and I love to help people learn and understand and explore, and let's try this and iterate on it. And that wasn't where I was. And so that was really what it was. At least that was the feeling connected to whatever the scripture was, is that God put us each here for a very specific purpose. And I didn't feel like that's where mine was. Not that it wasn't in impact and mission serving, but I think it's like the buttons I was pushing to make that happen around me, I wasn't getting it there.
I love that. And, or maybe it was just, a new chapter. It's from personal experience. I had this engineering identity, and I've resisted so long letting go of that because I just felt like it was such a permanent decision. It's like, well, if I leave engineering and I go be an entrepreneur, then I've given up all of this. It's like, but I could always go back to that, right? Like there was this reality, you could go back and serve in a nonprofit, and you could serve them in different ways. So I love the courage, I guess is where I'm getting at. You had a lot of courage to be that decisive. And then, moved over into something that wasn't, you figured it out. It wasn't like quite the right fit at first, and you found your way through it. So I would love to sort of fast forward a little bit and talk more about where you find yourself today. So sounds like more strategy work. Do you have a sort of like certain type of, I know from knowing you that you definitely do a lot of things in your local community as an example. Is there a certain type of client that you just feel so ecstatic to get to serve when they come across your plate?
I love working with women who are the face of their business. I love working with women who are in local business. So it could be small town. I live in a small town. I grew up in a small town, and being a preacher's kid, there are dynamics that come with that, right? That I grew up knowing. And so I love to work with women like that in a local business, not necessarily a service provider or having a storefront, but people who do business with other people where they live and play and work. So, you might be doing business with somebody who is kids on the same t-ball team as yours, or you might see them at church, or you bump into them at the grocery store. There's a little bit a different dynamic there when you're trying to juggle those things. And so that is the space that I really, really like to hang out in, because it's about, in my mind, marketing is about developing relationships and not as much the like sales and transaction side of things. And so how do you show up as a good human? How do you show up as the person that God called you to be? How do you run a business in a world that's saying, that your bank account and your title is the measure of your success and your wealth? And how do you juggle all of those things and be the face of a business that is truly an authentic representation of you?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. I hadn't really made this connection. Maybe this is one of the reasons I feel like I resonate so much with you, Danielle. It's like when I left engineering, my entire portfolio, because I kind of just started doing all marketing for all people, but it basically was like my dentist, a restaurant I frequented, my sister-in-law. And so it was very much local. And in fact, it was a local butcher shop in my original hometown of 7,500 people. So yes, very much like you, hometown, came from a family of farmers. And that relationship is actually what brought me into Fire Creek Snacks, which when people know the rest of my story and how I ended up doing podcast stuff, it was really through a local connection in my hometown. So I love that. To me, it's a very pure intent. And there's this, I think this is an important thing to plug into. So there's this analogy. It's kind of a crude analogy, but it's in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And basically all it means is, if like I'm a marketing expert and I go into a room of marketing experts, I'm just like one of many, and it's like I'm in a red ocean. But if I'm like, I know a little bit about marketing and I go into a room of restaurateurs, like they're all like, oh, marketing? You're like so amazing. So is there a dynamic there where you feel like you get a unique expression of your gifts because you're working with people who maybe they just don't have that marketing training. They just don't have the sophistication, because you've obviously dove real deep into it and spent a big part of your professional career learning marketing, relationship building, messaging. So yeah, well, I guess what is it, do you think, that draws you so much to this sort of local business, women-facing business that kind of feeds your spirit? Because that's really what I sense from you.
I don't know how many times I have found myself in the last 6 years since I looked at my husband and said, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. Like, who was supposed to tell me this? Right. So there are certainly resources out there when you start a business, but so many lessons learned because I didn't set out to start a business. And so I just think it's really important to find a community and a network and people that are around you that are there for you, right? That are there to speak your name in a room where you aren't, who are there to say, hey, you can't skip all the bumps and mistakes that I made because everybody has to learn. But here's this one thing that really tripped me up and I'd love to help you skip it. That I think is really important in the entrepreneurial kind of journey, to surround yourself with those kinds of people. And I didn't start out having that. And so it was like when I finally got to that point, I was like, oh, this is what we need, right? We need more women supporting each other. We have Instagram and Pinterest. I'm going to sound like such a hater, and I really am not. They have a place in this world. But I think as online media and marketing are just so present in our daily lives, we see influencers, we see perfection, or what looks like perfection. There were 100 takes behind it, but it looks ideal and perfect. And people are saying it's real easy. You just got to follow these 7 steps. If somebody is in the exact life phase as that person who said it's these 7 steps, then yes, it is that easy, and follow those 7 steps. But everybody is so unique and every situation is different. And so so I think that is really why I want to do what I do is I spend a whole bunch of money on a whole bunch of marketing and sales promises that sounded right and weren't right for me. And I didn't know that I had the permission to take what served me and leave the rest and to write my own rules. And so that is what I lead with my clients is we're going to write the rules. We're going to take the good stuff, right? We're going to build a foundation on best practices, knowing that it needs to be fine tuned to make it work for you.
Oh, I love that. That's very well put. So kind of last piece here on sort of talking about your business, and then we're going to spend at least half our time today really talking about one-liners and examples of that, because I think that's a super juicy topic. And you and I have seen within the seven-figure lead community, just like the appetite for that. People are like, yes, I really need help with this. But I do want to ask, it's a sort of a double question. Like, where do you see your business going, let's say like 3 years from now? And then sort of related to that, because I do sense there's something to it. Do you feel like your business is like an expression of your faith in some way, or sort of an outlet for your Christian faith? And so answer either or both those, that as you feel comfortable. But I feel like there's something there under the surface that I wanted to kind of tap into.
I have no idea where my business will be in 3 years.
I love that answer. That's awesome.
I don't. And to be quite honest, this year was the first year that I actually set goals for my business. I had never done that before. Don't ask me what they are, because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh gosh, what are they? But I wanted to take inspired action. And again, this is kind of those rule, like you get to write and break the rules, and giving myself permission to set a goal, but not hold myself to it specifically, to say, I am marching towards this, and I might go off on a completely different trail in that direction. And that is totally okay. So I am a rule follower by nature. And so I want tell me exactly what to do and follow the steps. And obviously it doesn't work that way. And so that was kind of a big thing for me this year, was setting goals, knowing that on December 31st, even if I don't reach them from a metrics or KPIs perspective, I'm going to sit in the gain and not the gap. And I'm going to look back at the last 365 days and go, what an amazing journey it's been, even if it was very different than what I set out at the beginning of the year to do.
That's awesome.
Now, thinking about my faith being really rooted in my business, it absolutely is. What I know about myself is that if I try too hard, or I let the worldly view of business and success and entrepreneurship take too much of a hold of my mind, I'm not going to say everything falls apart. That's very dramatic. Things are not in alignment for me, and business doesn't come. But when I sit and every day, many times a day, sometimes say, God, I surrender this business to you. Who am I supposed to serve today? How can I be the person that you called me to be to serve other people? That's when it comes. So if I am stuck on a goal, or have my all my eggs placed in, trying to get a proposal accepted or something like that, I just feel completely out of alignment and so disconnected. And again, my husband, the incredible supporter and encourager that he is, he'll say, hey, babe, hey, babe. It's not,
hey,
we need to talk. It's, hey, babe, why don't you go for a run? Or can you hop on your treadmill and do some walking? And when I do that, he's never wrong. He's always right about that. I put in my headphones, I turn on a playlist, and God beautifully sets up these playlists for me that reminds me that I'm not in control, that he's got this plan for me. And I can usually physically feel myself release the tension. And I will say, more often than not, when that happens, when I get done from the run or get off the treadmill and come sit down at my desk, it may not be the thing I was worried about or waiting for, but something new is in my inbox, or I got a new text message. I have literally released the stress of a project, and somebody that I had been stewarding reached out and said, I think it's ready to go. Yeah, take my money. And I'm like, okay, God, how can you argue with that? Right? There's no other way. So being more tuned in, from what I know is that being more tuned into what I need personally and my faith, the business side of things falls into place.
I love that. I'm so glad I asked that question. I knew it was in there, and I want to hear your words and wisdom around this, because so relate to it. I won't, this is about Danielle, so I won't get into my own story, but I'll just say amen. And ditto, I guess, in a lot of ways. That's really awesome. So I know you and I talked about like with what we want to give to the audience with this. So obviously, your story is really impactful, and I think tons of people can relate to it. And that was a gift. But kind of part two here, we want to talk about one-liners. And so we did this one-liner workshop in our community. And so Danielle led this amazing session a couple months back, and then just a lot of one-on-one interactions with people and helping them get clarity on a one-liner. So I guess, first of all, Danielle, like if someone said, what's a one-liner? Like how would you summarize what it is and kind of what it's for? And then maybe we can talk about some best practices.
This is my favorite topic, Dustin. I love this. I'm gonna sit up straighter and lean in closer. So a one-liner it's that first interaction that you have with people. So again, I tend to work with local business, kind of in-person conversations and relationship building. So it's that answer to the question, what do you do? And the mistake that we make, everybody has had a slimy sales situation, right? We're all trying to avoid slimy sales. And that's why most people don't sell in their business, because they don't want to do the slimy sales. So the thing that makes slimy sales slimy is that they don't have permission to sell. If it's like, well, use the car salesman, right? Like they just launch into all of these things and you're just like, whoa, hello. I just wanted to look at this car and open the door and smell the fresh leather. Like I don't need your life story. Don't need you to tell me about 47 cars. So that's what makes sales slimy. Let's talk about like a networking situation, or you meet somebody and they say, what do you do? Your gut reaction, especially if you have no connection to this person, is to basically word vomit on them every product or service that you have, because you don't know what's going to land with them. And that's slimy, right? You don't have permission to give them all of that information. So what you want in your one-liner is for them to just give them a little bit to show that, you know what you're talking about. Here's the thing. And you want them that to pique their interest to where they lean in and they give you permission by saying something like, how do you do that? Or tell me more about that. And then you have the permission to continue on. So that's the biggest distinction. And that's where the one-liner can be such a powerful and really effective tool, is that you're giving just enough so that they ask you and invite you to tell them more, which everybody wants, right? I want to keep talking about my business. I want to keep telling you all of the amazing things that can happen from us working together. And so that's the biggest thing. The other thing that I think is really important to think about with a one-liner is that this is a way that you show your expertise and your authority in your field, because you're not actually talking a whole lot about yourself. You're talking in a way that shows that you understand your target audience. And so if you've ever been in a situation where you ask them, what do you do? And they go into like a whole, well, it was a family-owned business and we've been around for 50 years and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, ooh, those are all really critical things and they're really important. And there's another time and place for that part of the conversation. So see, here I go. I could just keep talking on and on.
I know.
I'll just leave it at that for a second about the one-liner.
No, that's great. I think that's a really important way to answer it, because it's as much about what it's not as what it is. Because people are like, what do you do? And then everyone's mind's flooded with all these horrible examples of awkward situations they've been on the receiving end of that. And then they probably cringe thinking about, yeah, I had this like perfect opportunity to talk to someone that I really wanted to talk to. They caught me off guard. So what do I do? And I just froze, or I rambled for 5 minutes. I was sweating. And like, we want people to be prepared. We want people to be able to like walk away from this episode and have a solid one-liner. So Danielle, is there a template, framework, structure to this? Like how do you like to like start people when they start thinking about how to formulate their own one-liner?
So the easiest template or formula to follow is problem, solution, success. So you start with the problem. If you think about social media, that's the hook, right? What are you going to say that's going to hook people in to kind of lean forward and pay attention? And that's where you demonstrate your authority, because you say, I understand, like this is the problem, right? The next part of it is the solution. Well, you've got a problem, or someone has this problem. I have the solution to solve that problem. And then the next thing is the success piece. So you're really getting at their emotion there and saying like, this problem is stopping you from achieving something, right? That's why we look for a solution. We're trying to get somewhere and we've got this blocker. And so again, you're demonstrating your authority in the space by saying, I know what you're trying to accomplish. I know this is getting in the way. I've got the solution and let's talk. Like, let's go. Let's fix this.
That's awesome. So problem, solution, success. I won't put you on the spot too much. Do you have any favorite examples or maybe a client example or your own example or just off the top of your head, but do you have any just examples? I've seen dozens of examples of Danielle in written format workshopping these. And it's like literally like epiphany moment after epiphany moment. Like, wow, that's really good. So some of us process verbally, some of us don't, but is it fair to put you on the spot and ask for an example?
Of course. So you go to a networking event and you meet somebody and you say, what do you do? And the person says, I'm a plumber. And you go, cool. No problems at my house. Nice to meet you. Right? Can I get your card? I mean, right? But you go to the networking event and you talk to the person and you say, what do you do? And the guy says, when your grandma is on her way over for Thanksgiving dinner and everything has to be perfect because she's going to run her finger across your mantle to make sure there's not any dust. And you're kind of like, yeah, well, I'm a plumber and I make sure that when your tiny humans flush a Ninja Turtle down the toilet 30 minutes before grandma is supposed to be here, I'll come, make sure it's all taken care of, get those Ninja Turtles, clean them off, give them back to your kids, tell them how bad it is that they don't do that, and then be out the door before grandma even arrives so that you guys can have the best Thanksgiving ever. Okay. This guy gets me. He knows that things go down my toilet that aren't supposed to. He understands how stressful it is when grandma comes over. And he knows that he's going to pick up the phone. He's going to answer. He's going to show up real quick. He's going to sneak out the back door as grandma's walking in the front door. You are my man. I don't even want your business card. I want to give you my cell phone number. I want you to take a picture of my face so that you remember me when I call you, like I am the person, right? Like that is my plumber forever.
That's awesome. And so I know you embellished that a little bit, but it made it extremely memorable. And so if someone is more quote unquote advanced with this and they got a little color, like the Ninja Turtles is maybe like something that they like to work in. That's awesome. If someone's like a little intimidated by that, they're like, that's really good, but like, I can barely say my own name. Like, is there like a more basic version of that where someone could sort of start and so they don't feel like they have to have like the super compelling, fun version?
Yeah. So I think that's a good point. And I think it's important. It's kind of like art where you have to understand the rules and follow the rules a little bit before you can start to break them. And I think that we often get caught up in the like marketing speak trap where we think that we're about to deliver a marketing or sales pitch or message. And I see this all the time, even in one-liner workshop where we're doing this together and we go around the room and somebody goes to share and they sit up, straighten up a little bit, their voice changes. And I'm like, and they sound like they're announcing something on the radio. And I'm like, no, this is a conversation. This is your normal, who you are, right? So I just I think this is a great call out. I'm glad you said something about that. Permission to start really simple and basic and to the facts. And then you do get to expand and advance as it lands. I mean, I've got a bookkeeper client and we started out really simply and she's not super comfortable with getting detailed like that. And I think this is how she introduces, she's like, when it comes up on tax season and you're not sure, you sit there every night frustrated, what does she say? You wake up every night stressed that you're going to owe the government money. People are like, yeah, well, I'm a bookkeeper.
I felt the pit in my stomach. So yes, I do.
Yeah, it's a visceral reaction. She says, I'm a bookkeeper and I help people manage their books all year long so that there aren't any surprises at tax. And it's very simple, right? It's very simple, very basic. It gets to the core and people are like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, tell me, how does that work? How do you do that?
Yeah. And then like, a little more advanced version. So it's like, that would be so perfect at like a chamber of commerce. It's like a local business and, people, that's kind of a universal one-liner that would work for all types of businesses. I can imagine if she was, let's say she specialized with online businesses or entrepreneurs who have like lots of moving pieces and, are always like focused on the revenue and not really paying attention to the categorization of expenses and all that. She could use the exact same one-liner, but instead of saying like, how business or people lie awake at night worried that they're going to have a big tax bill, she could literally say like, how online coaches wake up in the middle of the night thinking they're going to have a big tax bill. And all of a sudden, like that same one-liner is tuned into a totally different market because she just described the problem slightly differently, right? Like the same solution, same benefit really, or success. But I guess tweaking the problem. Here's how I want to ask this in the form of a question. If someone wants to be more specific in who they're attracting with this one liner? Is it in like which of the three pieces do they typically want to modify from the formula between problem, solution, and success?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say it doesn't really matter, either problem or solution, either one. The solution could be I help, and then that's where you go into detail, or the problem could be a little bit more specific to what that audience is. And you said something that triggered me that I see happen a lot on people's first drafts of their one-liners. They essentially think of what their product or service is, and they kind of try to think of the opposite of it for the problem. And often that is something that they're not typically problem aware about that. And so the way that you work through that is to literally think about what is waking your clients up at night. So when they wake up at 2:00 and roll out of bed to go to the bathroom or whatever, and they sit back down and they can't go back to sleep, what is it that they're thinking about? So, in the bookkeeper's case, it's not that they're thinking, oh, I wish my books were cleaner. They're thinking, I do not want to owe the IRS money. Right. So that's a distinction that I think is really important to call out. And if you're stuck, like, what is the problem? What is keeping people awake at night? What are they thinking about?
It's really good. Back when I was trying to work on my own one-liner, I first kind of came up with the Podcast Profits Accelerator, like exactly as you said. I'm like, oh man, I totally did that, So I knew I had the solution was podcast guesting. And so I would start to describe the problem of like, hey, a lot of coaches want to be on podcasts, but they don't know how to do it. And so I have the Podcast Profits Accelerator to help them do podcast guesting. And while that may be kind of true, like, yeah, no one wakes up thinking, man, I really want to be on a podcast. That's not the problem. That is the solution that we can offer. But the problem is actually like lead generation, right? So a much better one-liner, I think, as I was listening to you describe the structure, would be like some of the world's best, a lot of great coaches are totally dependent on referrals. And so we give them a system so they can generate their own leads through podcast guesting just by telling their story and teaching their craft or whatever. Because the thing that actually would keep someone up is like, all of my business comes from one referral source, or like, what if this person gets hit by a bus, or like, I don't really have like my own way to generate leads. That is a thing that keeps people up, right? But not like necessarily the mechanism that I want to focus on as my solution. So I think that's really important in the structure of problem, solution, success. Ultimately you want to tie that together in a little bow and make it flow well, but they're really three different things, right? Is that a fair way to think about that? Like, and I feel like the problem might be the hardest one for people to describe well.
Yeah, they are. They're separate things, but they also have to follow the same flow. So often your target audience probably struggles with a few things. And so another thing that I see people get into, and this is why you got to practice your one-liner. It will not be the same as what you're coming up with right now as you're listening to this podcast. Mine changes. I try different ones on every couple of weeks. Like, I want to say this today. This lands. I'm hearing a lot in my space or my target audience space about this. So I'm going to do this. Like, I do not have something etched in stone. But to get back to the point, the thing that I see sometimes is we have a problem and we introduce a solution that's for a slightly different problem. And so when you know a lot about your target audience, it's almost like the curse of knowledge, right? You know that they're overwhelmed. You know that they don't have time. You know that they're struggling to juggle multiple things, but you've got to have the solution match the problem. So if the problem that you say is, I know that we can use the bookkeeper. A lot of people are worried about how they're going to pay or if they're going to owe the IRS. I'm a bookkeeper and I help people. I don't know. I can't even think of a bad example
forecasting
now.
or something, right?
Sure,
Like that's not.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, cash flow forecasting.
Cause the IRS to knock at your door. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it's almost like I'm so ingrained in this. Sometimes I have a hard time with the bad examples. But yeah, that's a great. So you're in. They're kind of like, okay. And then you lose people, right? Because you can see them start to think and noodle. And that's when you realize that you're like, okay, well, try that a little differently next time.
Yeah. So kind of the last conceptual question, it might be fun to workshop one together, but so with the one-liner, you gave us a great framework. So problem, solution, success, and we've been verbally kind of given a few different examples of that. I think some really good ones with the bookkeeper example in particular. Does this vary depending on the audience or like even the medium? Like would a written one be different than a verbalized one? And would a casual conversation be different than something that might get announced as a bio on a podcast? You know what I mean? Like it feels like there's different places a one-liner shows up. And so is it okay to have different versions of it?
It totally is. I think it's important that you do, in fact, because we write and we speak differently, right? And so often as we're creating this, like if you're sitting at your computer and typing it out or writing it out, you may go to speak it out loud and it feels clunky. Or that might be when you kind of have that radio announcer voice come on. So you do want it to be the spoken one you want to practice. If somebody says, "What do you do?" Now, when somebody says, "What do you do?" your gut reaction is to say, "I'm a marketing strategist." And when you're first trying this out, it's okay to do that. I'm a marketing strategist. What I have found is that here's the problem and here's the solution. Totally fine, right? I'm not dogmatic about this. But when you have your written version, you can embellish a little bit more. You can give some details. For example, I love helping people who X, Y, and Z, and you can list some of that criteria. You don't want to, in the main part of your one-liner, that problem, solution, success, you don't want to list a whole bunch of things. Like it's easy to think about, okay, let's just, this, they are experiencing this, and this. But when you put lists in, people only focus on processing that list and they get distracted and they miss the whole next part of the thing that you're talking about. So you can change it depending on the audience. You can change it depending on where you are. I was at a networking event in a bar scenario or situation one time. The acoustics were terrible, but they made everybody go around and introduce themselves. And so I read the room and I just yelled, "Everybody hates marketing. I love marketing and I do it. I'm Danielle." And I had 4 or 5 or 6 people flock to me at the end of the thing, right? Like I wasn't trying to give my normal elevator pitch in this crowded, horrible acoustic room, but I got the point across, right? And people came and talked to me and it was really effective.
That's good. That reminds me, I was at Podfest one time and speed networking, so cringy, but you're sitting around a table and people are like, "Introduce yourself." So everyone's like, "I'm Joe and I got this podcast." And then they talk for 5 minutes. And I actually have a podcast at the time. So I was just like, "I'm Dustin. I'm a professional podcast guest." And I just sat back and then I had so many people come up to me like, "Tell me about that. What do you mean by professional podcast guest? What's that mean?" And I'm just like, "Well, I don't have a podcast, but I've built some businesses by podcast guesting, and it actually got several clients from that event." And I think to your point, that's not like, if someone's if I'm on a podcast, they're like, "Dustin, tell us about what you do." I'm a professional podcast guest. And I just, that's not really eloquent enough. You give more of the traditional format, but there are some applications where like a really short version or in a written format, like you said, you can get away with a little longer version. One thing I do want to make sure we kind of catch in the podcast that, I'll never forget. And watching you work down this list of people's one-liners in our community, you said like, commas are not your friend. So can you expand on that a little bit? Because this is definitely my Achilles heel when it comes to writing things out.
Yeah, commas are not your friend. They're not. And they come from a good place, right? They come from us wanting to provide the right information and the information of value to whoever is on the receiving end. But what you'll do is lose people because they're so focused on processing that list. And you can watch people, right? So the brain and the eyes are, you're going to say this in a weird way. And there's probably somebody who's more medically and trained in like or more psychologically trained in this, and I'm going to butcher this, but basically your eyes move to kind of up and to the left when you are trying to recall something, and they move up and to the right when you're trying to process something. So if you are in a conversation and you see people's eyes moving, right, if they're speaking, it's that they're just trying to find the right words or remember the memory or whatever to speak to you. If you see them looking the other direction when you are speaking, it means that they're trying to track, like they're getting lost. And that is definitely in the moment a sign for you to pause, slow down, and think about what you're saying. But when you have commas, you have at least 3 items, right? Which means you have a list. And so people are thinking about the first thing and the second thing and the third thing. And if you think about in that problem or the solution, when they're processing that and you're saying the next thing, they're missing it. And you don't want them to miss it. So those commas come from a place of insecurity, right? Like we don't know what the right thing for this person is to say. And that's where just knowing your audience and getting really dialed in to this kind of a thing with that one-liner. So you say enough to hook them and intrigue them and ask them to tell you more. And then you can bring those commas in later. But yeah, they're not your friend, man. Gotta leave them.
It was funny to see this in a written form because it's just like, I don't know, 75% of the first versions that people put for themselves had commas. And it's like this list of things that either they solve or the benefit or, or the problem. I was just like totally guilty of that. And when you gave a shortened version with no commas, I was like, that's so much better. Like I could actually remember that and process it and articulate it. Well, maybe we'll spend like 2 minutes on a quick example. I like just a kind of workshop something I had in my mind. And of course, we want to talk about how people get a hold of you, Danielle. And honestly, the shortcut, if you're like, I just want a really good one-liner, is just hire Danielle to do it. And we'll talk about how to get a hold of her. But selfishly, I have an idea that I thought would be fun to workshop for just like really, I think it would take us just 2 minutes. I got the Podcast Profits Accelerator, and we talk a lot about what that is. And you've experienced that. That's like a full bore 90-day program. And it's really for people that are doing coaching, consulting, own an agency. It's a pretty advanced program. I've had more interest recently, and I've had a personal interest in working in trying a shorter format. And so the long story short is I'm thinking about doing like a 30-day sort of mini accelerator that's using podcast guesting specifically to help authors sell more books. And so I'd love to kind of workshop a one-liner for that if you'd indulge me with that.
Let's do it. I love this.
All right. So where should we start? If I come to you and I'm like, hey, I got this idea, like coach me through it, and maybe I'll take some notes. And if we can come up with a final one-liner, we'll announce it here first. So.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got an author or someone who has written a book. What is their core desire? What do they want to do with this?
I'd say I'll give the long version. You can help me shorten it. I mean, I think sell more books is sort of like on the nose. And then if you're like, well, why are they want to sell more books? Because they've done a lot of work to create a great book. They have a message they want to get out into the world. They want to be positioned as a thought leader. I think there's a lot of these sub reasons, but it feels like the main thing they want is just to be able to sell more books.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that somebody did all of the work to put all of the work into writing a book. The thing that wakes them up in the middle of the night is, how am I going to get people to read this? Right.
73 people have seen this book, and I spent 3 years on it. Yeah.
Yes. I want to be a best-selling author. Like, how do I do that? Right. How do I get to that? I would think that knowing what I do about your program I feel like we're going to cheat a little bit, but it'll make it easier to condense. So I think thinking about the problem, most authors write a book and think the hard work is done, but really they have to figure out how to get their book in front of people. I help authors use podcast guesting as a way to get their book in front of more people so that they have a bigger impact.
Done. This is why Danielle gets paid the big bucks.
I'm going to verify a little.
I'm going to pull that out, and it's going on LinkedIn as a post that you're going to see in the near future. No, that's really good. You said it so fast I couldn't even write it down, but fortunately I have a recording. But that's beautiful because I think you start off in a way that I just wouldn't have clicked because I'm too close to it. And you're like, well, most authors write a book thinking that was the hard part, and I think that's going to really intrigue people. Like, well, if that's not the hard part, then what is, right? And it's like, but there's this whole other side of this, that you need to be able to have people find and buy the book. And then, so my solution is podcast guesting. That's like my unique mechanism. And then obviously success is to be able to spread their message and become a bestseller or whatever that might look like. So that's awesome. So you probably can't repeat that. Like it just like flowed out of your brain. It was beautiful. I won't ask you to repeat it, but that was really, really good. So great example. All right. So, the question that's coming, Danielle, is like, if people want more Danielle in their life, they maybe want some help with a one-liner, maybe they're a female-led business, local or otherwise, and they just really want someone with your heart and your smarts to come alongside them and help them with their marketing in a way that feels really authentic and fun. How should people get a hold of you, or what's the next step if people want to work with you?
I love to meet business owners on LinkedIn. It is my favorite business social platform. So you can just search my name, Danielle Bornowski, spell it out phonetically. So it's BORNOWSKI, Danielle Bornowski on LinkedIn. And I would love to have a conversation about your goals and what you're up to and how we can make your business, the marketing machine of your business, be as awesome and as aligned as what you're doing in person.
I love it. Yeah. And probably not a lot of Danielle Bornowski's. It's kind of like Dustin Riechman's, it's like, it's a bear of a last name, but fortunately yours spells like it sounds. And the good news is we're pretty unique in the world. So I love that. So go to Danielle on LinkedIn, Danielle Bornowski on LinkedIn. We'll definitely link up to your LinkedIn profile so people can make that as easy as possible. And if you forget all that, just ask me and I will connect you directly with Glee because Danielle's one of my favorite people. She's been a long time part of our community and just adds a ton of value all the time. We just had a networking call for our community right before this, and she was connecting and helping people with their messaging and their one-liners, and just doing what she does. And so I'm very grateful for you, Danielle, as a friend, as a business associate, and now as a featured member of the Seven Figure Leap podcast. So thank you for being here.